My business partner refused to book my flight for a $10 million deal. He insulted me and called me a fool. The email notification pinged on my phone at exactly 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the time because it was the moment everything changed. Miss Carter, we're excited to meet with you and Mr. Ross next week in London to finalize the investment details. Please confirm your availability. My hands trembled as I read the message from Lancaster Capital Group. $10 million. After 3 years of building SkyTech Solutions from a garage startup to a promising tech firm, we were finally about to secure the funding that would launch us into the stratosphere. I'd spent countless nights perfecting our neural network technology, sacrificing weekends, relationships, and sleep to make this dream a reality. I practically sprinted down the hall to Mark's office, not bothering to knock before bursting through his door.
Mark.
They want to meet us. Lancaster Capital. I waved my phone like a winning lottery ticket. $10 million, Mark. Can you believe it? Mark Ross looked up from his sleek glass desk, his expression shifting from annoyance at being interrupted to a calculated smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. At 42, he was 12 years my senior, with salt and pepper hair that he maintained with religious precision, and a wardrobe of tailored suits that cost more than my monthly rent. Well, he said, leaning back in his ergonomic chair. Looks like my connections finally paid off. His connections. I bit my tongue. The Lancaster meeting had come through my research presentation at the Tech Summit last month, but I'd learned early on that contradicting Mark only made things worse. We need to book flights, I said, already pulling up travel options on my phone. They want us there by Monday. If we leave Sunday, we'll have time to prepare on the flight, and... Mark's laugh cut me off. Not a genuine laugh of excitement, but something harsh and dismissive that made my skin crawl. Elena, he said, my name dripping with condescension, you're not seriously thinking of going to London, are you? I froze, my excitement evaporating in an instant. What are you talking about? Of course I am. This is our company. Our funding. Mark stood up, buttoning his designer jacket with practiced ease. He walked around his desk and perched on the edge, looking down at me like a teacher explaining something to a particularly slow student. Elena, you're good at the product stuff, I'll give you that. The algorithms, the coding, all the technical details, that's your area. He gestured vaguely toward the development department. But business? Negotiating deals? That's my territory. You just mess things up. Stay here and let the professionals handle it. The words landed like a physical blow. 3 years of partnership, of building this company together, and this was how he saw me? As some back-office tech nerd who couldn't be trusted in front of investors? Mark, I secured this meeting. My presentation caught their attention. And I'll close the deal, he interrupted. That's how this works. You build the product, I sell it. You're brilliant with code, Elena, but let's be honest, you freeze up in boardrooms. Remember the Westlake pitch last year? My cheeks burned. The Westlake meeting had been a disaster, but only because Mark had changed our presentation slides without telling me, leaving me fumbling through unfamiliar talking points. This is different, I insisted, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. This is the biggest deal we've ever had. I should be there. Mark sighed dramatically, returning to his chair. It would be a waste of company funds to send both of us. First-class tickets to London aren't cheap, you know. I'd fly economy, I said quickly. I don't care about that. It's not about the ticket price, Elena. It's about efficiency. I can handle Lancaster Capital on my own. He picked up his phone, effectively dismissing me. Besides, someone needs to keep things running here while I'm gone. I stood there, a storm of emotions brewing inside me. Anger, humiliation, disbelief. 3 years of working 80-hour weeks, of pouring my heart and soul into this company, and I was being told to stay behind like an obedient dog while Mark took credit for my work. Again. But instead of exploding, I did something that surprised even me. I nodded and smiled. You're right, I said quietly. You should be the one to go. Mark looked up, clearly not expecting me to cave so easily. A flash of suspicion crossed his face before settling back into smug satisfaction. I'm glad you understand, he said, already returning to his email. "I'll keep you updated from London." I turned to leave, but paused at the door. "When are you booking your flight?" "Already on it," Mark replied without looking up. "Business class. Need to be fresh for the meeting." Of course. Business class for himself, while refusing to book my economy ticket. "Good luck," I said, my voice steady despite the fury burning through my veins. As I walked back to my office, a strange calm settled over me. What Mark didn't know, what he had never bothered to learn, was that I had full control over the company's future. He had always acted like Skytech was his kingdom, and I was merely a skilled servant, valuable but replaceable. He had no idea how wrong he was. I closed my office door, leaned against it, and let out a long, controlled breath. Then I picked up my phone and made 2 calls, one to my travel agent and one to James Lancaster himself. Mark thought he was leaving me behind. He didn't realize he had just given me the perfect opportunity to step out of his shadow once and for all. As I booked my own flight to London, departing a day before Mark's, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. He had called me a fool. He had refused to book my flight. But what he didn't know was that this was just the beginning of his downfall. Most people who meet Mark and me together assume he's the majority owner of Skytech. He certainly acts like it, commanding rooms, making unilateral decisions, and treating me like his glorified employee rather than his equal partner. It's an impression he's carefully cultivated over the years, and one I've never publicly corrected. The morning after our confrontation, I arrived at the office early. The sun hadn't fully risen, casting long shadows across our modern open-plan workspace. I liked the building at this hour. Peaceful, potent with possibility, and most importantly, empty of Mark's suffocating presence. I headed straight to my private office and unlocked the hidden compartment in my desk drawer, a paranoid habit I developed after watching Mark accidentally look through my papers one too many times. From it, I extracted a leather portfolio containing documents that Mark had never seen. The original incorporation papers for Skytech Solutions, signed 3 years and 4 months ago. The papers told a different story than the one Mark paraded around. While he owned 35% of the company, I held 51%, a silent majority stake that gave me ultimate control. The remaining 14% was divided among our early angel investors. I still remember the night I secured that stake. Mark and I had been working on our neural network prototype for 18 months, surviving on ramen noodles and caffeine. We were close to a breakthrough, but our seed money was running out. "I've got a meeting with some investors tomorrow," Mark had announced, straightening his only decent tie. "Big shots from Venture Capital Row. They're interested in what we're building." "That's great," I'd replied, genuinely excited. "What time should I be ready?" Mark had laughed, that same dismissive laugh I'd come to hate. "Elena, this is a business meeting. These guys want to talk numbers and projections, not technical specs. Besides, you look exhausted. Stay here and keep working on the algorithm." I had been too tired to argue. So Mark went alone while I spent another 14 hours debugging our prototype. When he returned, he was practically floating. "We got it," he'd crowed, brandishing a bottle of expensive champagne. 300,000 in seed funding. We're officially in business. I should have been elated, but something felt wrong. "Let me see the paperwork," I'd said. "It's all standard stuff," Mark had waved dismissively. "We'll split the company 50-50. They take a small percentage. Everyone's happy." But I'd insisted, and what I found buried in paragraph 17, subsection B, nearly made me quit on the spot. Mark had agreed to give the investors a supervisory role in all technical development, essentially handing them control over my work. That night, while Mark celebrated at some networking event, I quietly contacted the lead investor, Diane Winters. She was surprised to hear from me. Mark had described me as just the tech person. 3 hours later, we had restructured the entire deal. I would get 51% ownership, Mark 35%, and the investors 14% with no supervisory role in development. "Why not tell him?" Diane had asked. My answer was simple: because he'll try to change it and we'll lose our funding. This way, everyone gets what they really want. Diane had smiled knowingly. "Smart woman. He underestimates you." The next day, Mark had signed the paperwork without reading it carefully, too eager to deposit the check and too arrogant to imagine I'd outmaneuvered him. For 3 years, I'd kept this secret, letting Mark believe he was the face and force behind Skytech, while I quietly built our technology into something revolutionary. I never corrected his assumption that we were equal partners at best, or that he was the majority owner at worst. It simply never became necessary to use my trump card, until now. I slipped the portfolio back into its hiding place and turned on my computer. My flight to London was booked for Saturday morning, a full day before Mark's. I'd also scheduled a private meeting with the Lancaster Capital team for Sunday afternoon, hours before Mark would even land in the UK. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Working from home today. Preparing for London. Handle things at the office. I smiled to myself. Mark working from home usually meant taking long lunches and making grandiose plans that I would eventually have to execute. Meanwhile, I was about to execute a plan of my own. I spent the day preparing my presentation for Lancaster Capital, highlighting the technical innovations that made our neural network unique in the market. I also pulled together financial projections, not the inflated numbers Mark typically used, but realistic, sustainable growth models that would withstand scrutiny. By late afternoon, I received an email confirmation from James Lancaster himself, agreeing to meet me privately on Sunday. Looking forward to hearing the technical details from the mind behind the innovation, he wrote. As I was shutting down my computer, our office manager Tara stopped by my door. Elena, Mark asked me to confirm his first-class booking to London. Did you want me to book your ticket too? I glanced up, fighting back a smile. No need, Tara. I won't be going to London. Oh, she looked confused. I thought this was the big deal you've been working toward? It is, I said calmly. But Mark thinks he can handle it alone. Tara frowned. She'd witnessed Mark's behavior enough times to understand the subtext. That doesn't seem right. I shrugged, maintaining my composure. Mark has his way of doing things. As Tara left, I felt a twinge of guilt for the deception. But then I remembered Mark's words, "Stay here and let the professionals handle it." The memory hardened my resolve. Let him fly first class. Let him practice his pitch in a luxury hotel room. Let him think he was in control. By the time he realized the truth, it would be too late. London greeted me with a steady drizzle and gray skies, but nothing could dampen my spirits as my taxi cut through the early Sunday morning traffic. I'd spent the 7-hour flight rehearsing my presentation, reviewing financial projections, and mentally preparing for what would be the most important meeting of my career. The Lancaster Capital offices occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in Canary Wharf, all glass and steel against the moody London skyline. As I entered the lobby, I felt a momentary flutter of anxiety. Mark's voice echoed in my head. You freeze up in boardrooms. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my navy blue blazer, and reminded myself that I had earned this moment. Miss Carter. The receptionist greeted me with a warm smile. Mr. Lancaster is expecting you. Please follow me. She led me to a corner conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Thames. James Lancaster stood as I entered, a tall man in his early 60s with kind eyes that contrasted with his reputation as one of the shrewdest investors in tech. Elena Carter, he said, extending his hand. The technical genius behind Skytech's neural network. I've been looking forward to this. I shook his hand firmly. Thank you for meeting me, especially on a Sunday. When brilliance calls, we answer, he replied with a wink. Though I admit, I was surprised to hear from you directly. Based on previous communications, I was under the impression that Mr. Ross handled all business aspects of Skytech. That's the impression Mark likes to give, I said carefully. But Skytech has always been a partnership. James gestured to the chairs around the polished conference table. I see. And will Mr. Ross be joining us today? Mark arrives tomorrow, I explained. He's unaware of this meeting. A flicker of surprise crossed James's face, followed by something that looked like curiosity. Intriguing. May I ask why this secrecy? This was the moment of truth, the point where I could either maintain the professional charade Mark and I had enacted for years or finally speak honestly. I chose honesty. Mr. Lancaster, Mark believes that I'm just the product person, that I'm incapable of handling business negotiations or representing our company to investors. He refused to book my flight to London, telling me to stay behind while he secured the funding. James's eyebrows shot up. That's unexpected. And unfortunately typical, I added. What Mark doesn't know is that I own the majority stake in Skytech. I've allowed him to be the face of our business operations because he's good at networking and opening doors. But the technology that brought you to the table, that's entirely my creation. For a moment, James said nothing, studying me with renewed interest. Then he leaned forward. Ms. Carter, I appreciate your candor. Now, I believe you have a presentation for me. For the next 2 hours, I walked James and 2 of his senior analysts through our neural network technology, explaining how our approach to machine learning differed from competitors and showcasing the real-world applications already generating revenue. Unlike Mark's typically vague presentations full of buzzwords and hockey stick projections, I delivered concrete data, realistic growth models, and honest assessments of both our strengths and challenges. Your honesty about the scaling issues you're facing is refreshing, James commented. Most founders try to hide potential obstacles. Hiding problems doesn't solve them, I replied. With proper funding, we can address these challenges and reach our full potential. As I finished the technical portion of my presentation, one of the analysts, a sharp-eyed woman named Lydia, spoke up. This is impressive work, Ms. Carter. But I'm curious, why has Mr. Ross been the only representative at previous investment meetings? This presentation shows you clearly understand both the technical and business aspects of Skytech. I considered my words carefully. Mark is protective of his relationships. He believes investors want to deal with him exclusively. And how would you characterize your working relationship with Mr. Ross? James asked, his tone neutral but his eyes watchful. It would have been easy to unleash years of resentment, to tell them about every time Mark had taken credit for my work or dismissed my contributions. Instead, I chose diplomacy tinged with truth. Mark has strengths in networking and opening doors. I respect those skills. But our partnership has become unbalanced, with critical decisions being made without my input despite my majority ownership. I see. James exchanged glances with his team. And if Lancaster Capital were to invest in Skytech, how would you envision the management structure moving forward? The question caught me off guard. They were already talking as if the investment was a foregone conclusion. I would implement a more balanced leadership approach, I said carefully. Mark's networking abilities are valuable, but strategic decisions should reflect the company's best interests, not personal egos. James nodded thoughtfully, then surprised me by sliding a folder across the table. Our standard investment agreement. $10 million for a 20% stake in Skytech Solutions. I stared at the folder, momentarily speechless. You're offering the investment now? Before meeting with Mark? James leaned back in his chair, a knowing smile playing at his lips. Ms. Carter, I've been in this business for 30 years. In that time, I've developed a sense for authenticity and talent. He tapped the presentation displayed on the screen. This technology is revolutionary. More importantly, you clearly understand both its potential and limitations. What about Mark's presentation tomorrow? I asked. We'll still meet with Mr. Ross as scheduled, James assured me. But our decision is made. Lancaster Capital wants to invest in Skytech, with you at the helm. His words sent a wave of validation through me that nearly brought tears to my eyes. After years of being undermined and dismissed, here was one of the most respected investors in tech acknowledging my value. There is one condition, James added, sliding another document forward. Given what you've shared about the company dynamics, we'll need confirmation of your majority ownership before finalizing. I reached into my briefcase and produced the original incorporation papers. I came prepared. James examined the documents, nodding with approval. Excellent. Then we have a deal. As we shook hands to seal the agreement, I couldn't help but think of Mark, probably settling into his first-class seat at that very moment, blissfully unaware that his power play had backfired spectacularly. The deal wasn't just closed, it was closed on my terms. I spent Monday morning in my hotel room, reviewing the investment agreement and making calls to our legal team back home. James had invited me to attend Mark's presentation scheduled for 2 p.m. as an observer. He'd said with a conspiratorial smile. The prospect of watching Mark's inevitable downfall filled me with a complicated mix of anticipation and dread. At 1:30, I slipped into Lancaster Capital's offices through a side entrance as arranged with James's assistant. She ushered me into a small observation room connected to the main conference room by a one-way mirror. I could see everything, but no one could see me. "Mr. Lancaster thought you might appreciate the privacy," she explained with a knowing look. Through the glass, I watched as the Lancaster team assembled: James, Lydia, and 3 other executives I hadn't met during my presentation. They arranged papers, poured water, and made small talk while waiting. At precisely 2 p.m., the door swung open, and Mark strode in like a conquering hero. He wore his most expensive suit, the charcoal Tom Ford he reserved for closing deals, and carried a leather portfolio embossed with the Skytech logo. His hair was freshly cut, his smile confident and practiced. "James Lancaster." Mark boomed, extending his hand with the overconfident energy that had opened so many doors for him in the past. "A pleasure to finally meet in person." James shook his hand with practiced cordiality. "Mr. Ross, thank you for making the trip. Please have a seat." Mark settled into the chair at the head of the table, the power position, and immediately launched into his routine. "Before we begin, I want to thank you for recognizing the potential in Skytech. What we're building is going to revolutionize machine learning as we know it." James nodded politely. "Yes, the neural network technology is quite impressive." "Exactly." Mark beamed, pulling presentation materials from his portfolio. "Our proprietary algorithms." "I understand that your partner, Elena Carter, is the architect of that technology," James interrupted smoothly. Mark's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Yes, Elena is quite talented with the technical details. She heads our development team." "She's more than talented," Lydia interjected. "Her understanding of neural network architecture is revolutionary." Mark looked momentarily confused by the direction of the conversation, but pushed forward. "Absolutely, which is why I brought her on board. I've always had an eye for talent." He chuckled. "Though between us, she struggles with the bigger picture. Business strategy isn't her strong suit." From my hidden vantage point, I felt a surge of anger at his casual dismissal, followed by satisfaction, knowing what was coming. "Interesting perspective," James said mildly. "Please continue with your presentation." Mark seemed relieved to get back on script. He launched into his standard pitch, the one I'd heard him give dozens of times, filled with exaggerated market projections and vague technological claims that he clearly didn't fully understand. Watching him now, I realized how thin his knowledge actually was, how much he relied on charm and confidence rather than substance. 20 minutes into his presentation, after he'd laid out grandiose expansion plans and hinted at potential acquisitions, James held up a hand. "Mr. Ross, your ambitions are certainly bold, but I'm curious about some of these numbers." He slid a document across the table. "These projections differ significantly from what we reviewed yesterday." Mark frowned, glancing at the paper. "Yesterday? There must be some mistake. I just arrived in London last night." "Not with you," James clarified, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. "With Miss Carter." The color drained from Mark's face. "Elena? Elena is in London? She presented to our full investment committee yesterday afternoon," Lydia confirmed, watching Mark carefully. Her analysis of both the technology and market positioning was quite thorough. Mark's expressions cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and anger. "There must be some misunderstanding. Elena doesn't handle our investment relations. She's not authorized to. To represent the company, she owns 51% of." James finished for him, his tone suddenly cooler. "I believe she's authorized to do exactly that, Mr. Ross." Mark froze, his mouth open mid-protest. For perhaps the first time since I'd known him, he was completely speechless. I watched as the realization dawned on him. Not just that I was in London, but that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling. 51%? That's impossible, he finally managed, his voice strangled. We're equal partners. The incorporation documents indicate otherwise, James replied, sliding another paper toward Mark. Ms. Carter provided verification of the ownership structure. Mark stared at the document, his face reddening. This can't be right. There's been some kind of mistake. No mistake, Mr. Ross, James said firmly. Now, regarding the investment agreement. What investment agreement? Mark demanded, his composure fracturing. Nothing should have been signed without my presence. James exchanged glances with his team before responding. Mr. Ross, Lancaster Capital has already committed to a $10 million investment in Skytech Solutions. The contract was signed yesterday, with Ms. Carter representing the company. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's hands clenched into fists on the table, his knuckles white. That's not possible, he finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. Where is she? Where is Elena? James looked toward the one-way mirror and nodded slightly, my cue. I took a deep breath, smoothed my blazer, and walked around to the conference room entrance. The assistant opened the door for me, and I stepped into the room just as Mark was rising from his chair. Elena, he spat my name like a curse. What the hell do you think you're doing? I met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. Securing the future of our company, Mark. The future you tried to exclude me from. By going behind my back? By lying about company ownership. I never lied, I replied calmly. You simply never bothered to read the paperwork you signed 3 years ago. Too busy letting the professionals handle it, I suppose. Mark's face contorted with rage, but in the presence of our investors, he fought to maintain some semblance of control. We need to discuss this privately, he hissed. Actually, James interjected, I believe we were in the middle of reviewing the investment terms. Ms. Carter, would you join us? I took a seat directly across from Mark. Gladly. As James began outlining the details of the agreement, I watched Mark across the table. His face was a storm of emotions, fury, humiliation, disbelief, as he realized that not only had I secured the deal without him, but I'd been the majority owner all along. The funds will be released next week, James was saying, contingent upon the leadership structure we discussed yesterday. Mark's head snapped up. Leadership structure? What leadership structure? I sipped my water, my eyes never leaving his. That's the final point we need to discuss, isn't it, James? The corner of James's mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. Indeed it is. The flight back to the States was excruciating. Mark and I had separate seats. Mine in business class courtesy of Lancaster Capital, his downgraded from first class after he'd stormed out of the meeting and attempted to change his return flight to avoid traveling with me. Fate, or more likely, limited availability on transatlantic flights, had placed us on the same plane anyway. He spent the entire journey either furiously typing on his laptop or drinking scotch while glaring in my direction. I kept my focus on reviewing the finalized investment agreement and drafting a company-wide announcement about our new funding. By the time we landed, word of our success had already spread through the office. Tara had organized an impromptu celebration in the break room with champagne and cupcakes from the bakery down the street. As I walked through the door, applause erupted from the gathered staff. Mark pushed past me, his face thunderous. Conference room. Now, he growled under his breath. I turned to the team. Thank you all for the wonderful welcome. I'll share details about our new partnership with Lancaster Capital shortly. For now, please enjoy the celebration, we've earned it. As cheers went up again, I made my way to the glass-walled conference room where Mark was already pacing like a caged animal. I closed the door behind me, suddenly aware that every eye in the office was on us despite pretending to continue the party. What the hell was that? Mark exploded the moment the door clicked shut. You undermined me. You went behind my back. You made me look like a fool. I took a seat at the conference table, my calmness a stark contrast to his fury. You made yourself look like a fool, Mark. I simply stopped covering for you. Covering for me? He sputtered. I built this company. Did you? I asked quietly. Did you write a single line of code for a neural network? Did you develop the algorithm that caught Lancaster's attention? Did you stay up nights debugging the platform while you were out networking? That's your job, he shouted, slamming his palm on the table. I brought in the money, the connections, the deals, and took all the credit. I finished for him. Tell me, Mark, in all those investor meetings you insisted on handling alone, how many times did you present my work as your own? How many times did you minimize my contribution to Skytech? That's business, Selena, he said, his voice dripping with condescension despite his precarious position. Investors don't want to hear about team efforts. They want a strong leader with vision. A strong leader doesn't need to lie about their capabilities, I countered. A strong leader recognizes and values their team's contributions. Mark scoffed, some of his usual arrogance returning. Listen to yourself. This idealistic nonsense is exactly why I kept you away from investors. You don't understand how the real world works. I smiled thinly. I understand enough to have secured $10 million from one of the most respected investment firms in the industry without your help. His composure cracked again. About that, we need to discuss the terms of this deal. There's no way Lancaster Capital is dictating our management structure. They're not, I said simply. I am. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder containing documents I'd prepared with our company's legal team before the London trip. I slid it across the table to Mark. What's this? He asked suspiciously. A buyout offer, I replied. Fair market value for your 35% stake in Skytech. Mark laughed incredulously. You're trying to force me out? After everything I've done for this company? For you? For me? I repeated, my calm facade finally cracking. Let's talk about what you've done for me, Mark. You've taken credit for my work. You've dismissed my ideas. You've excluded me from meetings. You told me to my face that I was incompetent in business matters and called me a fool for wanting to be included in the biggest deal of our company's history. I stood up, unable to remain seated while the anger of 3 years finally poured out. And what's worse is that I let you do it. I let you parade around as the brilliant founder while I stayed in the background, believing your lie that it was better for the company. But it wasn't better for the company. It was better for your ego. Through the glass walls, I could see our employees had stopped pretending not to watch. Some had their phones out, probably recording everything. In that moment, I didn't care. Lancaster Capital didn't just invest in our technology, I continued. They invested in me, in my vision for Skytech's future. A future where innovation and honesty matter more than ego and appearances. And there's no place for you in that future. For a long moment, Mark stared at me, his face unreadable. Then, deliberately, he opened the folder and scanned the contents. This offer is insultingly low, he finally said. I hadn't expected him to go quietly. It's fair market value based on an independent valuation. Before the Lancaster investment, he countered, our valuation just tripled. That investment was secured after this offer was prepared. I acknowledged. However, the funds come with conditions, including a leadership change. Your position has weakened, Mark, not strengthened. Mark leaned forward, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. I'll fight this. I'll sue you for fraud, for breach of fiduciary duty. On what grounds? I challenged. Everything I've done has been within my rights as majority shareholder. Everything is documented, including your systematic exclusion of me from business decisions despite my majority stake. If anyone has breached their fiduciary duty, it's you. I pushed my chair back and stood. You have 24 hours to accept the offer or present a counter. After that, the board will vote on your removal, a board that now includes 2 Lancaster representatives who have already made their position clear. Mark's face flushed with anger. You planned this. All of it. No, I said honestly. I simply prepared for the day you'd go too far. I walked to the door, then paused. By the way, your login credentials have been suspended pending the resolution of this matter. IT will escort you to clear your personal items from your office. As if on cue, our head of IT appeared in the doorway, his expression professionally neutral despite the drama he'd undoubtedly witnessed. You can't do this, Mark hissed, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew he'd lost. I already have, I replied, walking away. You should have booked my flight, Mark. 3 months after the London trip, I sat in what used to be Mark's corner office, now redecorated to reflect my own style. Less ostentatious, more functional, with large whiteboards covered in flowcharts and algorithms alongside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The morning sun streamed in as I reviewed the quarterly reports showing Skyteka's remarkable growth since the Lancaster investment. There was a soft knock at the door. Tara entered with a tablet in hand. "The team is ready for you in the conference room," she said. "And the new hires are all set up. Clara from HR has their welcome packages prepared." "Perfect," I replied, gathering my notes. "Any word on the Microsoft partnership?" "Their legal team just sent over the final draft. Looks like we're good to go." Tara hesitated, then added, "Also, there's something you should see." She handed me the tablet, open to a business news site. The headline made me pause. Former Skytech co-founder launches new venture after controversial exit. Below was a photo of Mark, looking considerably less polished than I remembered, standing in front of a modest office space. I skimmed the article, which described his attempts to secure funding for a new AI startup called Ross Innovate. The reporter noted that despite Mark's networking efforts, investors seemed hesitant after the circumstances surrounding his departure from Skytech Solutions. "Should we be concerned?" Tara asked. I handed the tablet back to her. "Not at all. Mark's talents lie in selling other people's innovations. Without that, he doesn't have much to offer." The truth was more complicated than I let on. After rejecting my initial buyout offer, Mark had tried everything to maintain his position, threatening lawsuits, attempting to rally employees to his side, even approaching our clients directly to undermine confidence in my leadership. None of it worked. In the end, faced with unanimous board support for my leadership and the prospect of a lengthy, expensive legal battle he couldn't win, Mark had accepted a revised offer, significantly less than his shares were actually worth, but more than enough to start over. The agreement included a non-compete clause and a non-disparagement agreement that prevented him from bad-mouthing Skytech publicly. What the article didn't mention was that Mark had already burned through most of his payout. Through industry contacts, I'd heard about his lavish apartment, the sports car, the ill-advised investments made in a desperate attempt to maintain his appearance of success. Without Skytech's revenue supporting his lifestyle, and with his reputation tarnished in investment circles, his situation had become increasingly precarious. I felt no satisfaction in his struggles. The victory wasn't about destroying Mark. It was about claiming what I had earned and creating the company culture I'd always envisioned. As I walked toward the conference room, I passed the expanded development team hard at work on our next generation of neural network technology. What had once been a cramped space dominated by Mark's oversized ego was now an open, collaborative environment where ideas flowed freely. The Lancaster investment had transformed Skytech in ways I hadn't anticipated. Beyond the financial boost, James had connected us with strategic partners who saw the true potential of our technology. We doubled our staff, secured 3 major clients, and were on track to revolutionize how AI was implemented across multiple industries. The conference room fell silent as I entered. Around the table sat my executive team, a diverse group of brilliant minds I'd personally recruited to help lead Skytech into its next phase. "Good morning, everyone," I began, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Let's start with a Microsoft partnership update." As my CTO walked through the details of our upcoming collaboration with one of the tech giants that had once dismissed us during Mark's tenure, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from James Lancaster. "Just heard about Ross's latest venture failing to secure funding. Not surprised. Let me know when you're ready to discuss the next round of investment. Skytech's valuation has exceeded even my optimistic projections." I smiled to myself before returning my attention to the meeting. Later that afternoon, I happened to glance out my office window and spotted a familiar figure crossing the street below. Mark, in a suit that no longer looked custom-tailored, was walking quickly, head down, away from our building. For a moment, I wondered if he'd come to see Skytech's success firsthand, to witness what he'd lost through his own arrogance. Then I realized it didn't matter. His chapter in our story had ended, Mine was still being written. That evening, as I prepared to leave the office, I passed by the company timeline we'd installed in the reception area, a sleek digital display showcasing Skytech's journey from startup to industry leader. There was a photo from our early days, showing Mark and me standing in our first tiny office. He was front and center, grinning confidently, while I stood slightly behind him, holding the prototype that would eventually change everything. I'd kept that photo in the timeline deliberately, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of how far I'd come, from the woman who let someone else take credit for her work to the CEO who had transformed an entire company. As I walked to my car, I remembered Mark's words from that fateful day, "Stay here and let the professionals handle it." The memory no longer stung. Instead, it reminded me of the most valuable lesson I'd learned. True power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. Mark had lost everything because he couldn't see beyond his own ego. I had gained everything by finally embracing my full potential. The next morning, I received a surprising email from Mark, the first contact since his departure 3 months earlier. It was brief, just 2 lines. "You were right. I should have booked your flight." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The success of Skytech spoke for itself.